Hola, ¿hablas español? Hola, ¿hablan español? No speak Spanish?
No.
Where are you from?
What's that?
¿De dónde eres?
A couple streets over.
You living here in Mexico?
Yeah. Oh, I love Mexico. I don't like the United States.
Okay.
It's much calmer than New York. It's still very natural.
I've had a little bit of Mexican always in my family, but not by blood. But now I basically do internet marketing, remote work, things like that.
The Mexican capital is now considered one of the top 5 cities in the world for remote workers.
Nothing is stopping me from working remotely as long as I'm not earning wages here in Mexico.
Yeah, what would you do if you had that opportunity? You know, I grew up in the States. My family's only been there for 1 or 2 generations also. So, you know, obviously I'm from there, but I feel more comfortable here, to be honest.
This country is more chill. In Russia, everybody is on the rush. Everybody is running. Here, it's more chill.
Okay. Thanks, bro.
Thank you very much.
Nice to meet you, eh?
Thank you. Nice to meet you too. Thank you.
Yo, aquí Josue para Channel 5, Canal Cinco Latinoamérica. The gentrification in Ciudad de México is a big problem. ¿Qué opina de la gentrificación en México?
Terrible, nos está disparando las rentas de una manera inalcanzable. Ya no vamos a poder pagar renta en la Roma. De 12,000 se fueron a 25,000 pesos. Sí lo están sufriendo mucho.
What do you think about the prices in this zone?
The prices here, pretty comparable to Seattle prices. Yeah, muy caro.
Rent in Seattle is back on the rise. Average rent still more than $2,100 a month for a 700 square foot apartment.
You tasted some tacos?
Sí, sí.
¿Pica o no pica?
Pica, sí.
¿Mucho o no?
En medio, sí.
medio?
Sí.
Okay.
De habanero, sí. Gracias.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well.
As some of you may have seen, much of our previous coverage has focused on the issues along the US-Mexico border, particularly surrounding undocumented migrants coming from developing nations in Latin America who've crossed our border illegally in search of economic opportunity in the States. Many Americans have complained that this mass influx of migrants is taking away job opportunities from working-class Americans, lowering the bottom line for coal miners and veterans, flooding the streets with crime and violence, and leading to a canine genocide of epic proportions.
They're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the pets.
But what if I told you there's a reverse border crisis going on? That's right, rent and cost of living in Mexico's largest city has doubled and now tripled as a result of Americans. This all really began after the COVID pandemic of 2020, during which tens of millions of Americans working in the tech sector switched to a work-from-home model and no longer had to report to the office in cities like San Francisco and Seattle, where tech companies like Uber, Twitter, Facebook, Microsoft, and beyond are headquartered. So where'd they go? The answer is simple. They went somewhere where their paycheck stretches a lot further. Some chose cities like Austin, Texas, and Nashville, Tennessee, but 800,000 Americans have moved to the country of Mexico in the past 4 years, and almost nowhere has their presence felt more than in Mexico's capital.
You see graffiti like this that says "Fuera gringo," which means "Get out, gringo."
Much like the current situation at our border, if done right, this wouldn't be a bad thing. After all, tourism accounts for 17% of Mexico's GDP. Much like immigrant labor, documented or undocumented, accounts for 19% of the American workforce. But this rapid, mass influx of what are called digital nomads to Mexico City has overwhelmed the housing market there to such a degree that native-born Mexicans cannot feasibly live there on a standard salary.
Look past the charming cafes, flashy apartments, and you'll see this capital city for what it's becoming, a refuge for migrants.
I grew up in New York, LA.
Atlanta, Georgia.
Perhaps not the border crossing you expected. Americans leaving pricey US cities, heading south to work from home.
In this episode, our Latin American correspondent, Josue, will investigate the ongoing situation in Mexico City through the perspectives of locals, Americans, other foreigners, and local activists doing their best to bring awareness to the problem.
Perfecto. Ya estamos aquí con Fernando Bustos, quien es profesor de filosofía, entre otras cosas. Primero, antes que nada, me gustaría que en palabras más coloquiales me pudieras explicar lo que es la gentrificación para la gente que no está acostumbrada a este término.
Por ponerlo en términos bastante fáciles, la gentrificación es un fenómeno en el cual gente que tiene como mayor poder adquisitivo llega a vivir a determinadas zonas y comienza entonces a cambiar la forma de vida que tenía esa colonia, esa ciudad, esa calle, y al mismo tiempo, justo porque tienen mayor poder adquisitivo y tienen como otro tipo de gustos y demás, comienzan a abrir entonces, no sé, como panaderías francesas, lugar que sea como un poquito como más bonito, por así decirlo, como Estados Unidos, Europa, cosas por el estilo, y esto al mismo tiempo entonces comienza a hacer que cierren tiendas y que la gente que ya vivía ahí se comience a ir a otros lugares porque se encarecen los precios.
Activists say the formula is simple. As Mexico has sought to attract remote workers with higher purchasing power, it's created more inequality for Mexicans.
O sea, por ejemplo, hoy en día, por poner un ejemplo sencillo, hoy en día puedes ir, no sé, a clases, que aquí hay muchas de lugares de clases de yoga y ahora las clases las dan a veces en inglés, ¿no? Es decir, con que haya una persona que hable inglés y si el resto hablan español, de pronto las clases te las dan en inglés. Entonces también en muchos restaurantes, en muchas cafeterías, ahora las cartas también están más que nada en inglés o tienen los anuncios afuera en inglés. Vivo aquí en México, no tendría necesidad, a final de cuentas, de saber hablar inglés. Cuando yo voy a Estados Unidos o al país que sea, Francia, Japón, pues yo no voy esperando que den una clase en mi idioma solamente porque estoy yo, ¿no? Es decir, yo trato de adaptarme un poco al lugar a donde voy. Si voy a Estados Unidos, lo más fácil, pues intento saber un poquito de inglés para poder entrar a esa clase, ¿no?
Do you speak Spanish?
Sí.
Your favorite words in Spanish? Favorite words?
Mis palabras favoritos. Echar para atrás y no mames. Sí.
Okay. Bad words. Okay. Nice.
No sé, incluso siento que se pierde también como un poco de sentido de comunidad, ¿no? Y de pronto todos los días eran gringos y gringos y gringos diferentes, que yo siempre sentirme como un extranjero en mi mismo país, en mi misma colonia.
Let's pause for a moment and talk about gentrification. It's a polarizing buzzword that often divides people into two camps. On one side, you have people who see it as a great across-the-board thing. The neighborhood gets cleaned up, crime goes down, and home values rise.
For millions of people my age, that is a dream.
Then on the other side, you have those who view it as a form of colonization and cultural erasure.
Gentrification is genocide.
But it's important to understand that gentrification doesn't begin maliciously. Let's use the US as an example. Hipsterism, as we know it today, began in New York City in the early 2000s. The first hipsters were suburban-raised millennials who adapted grunge and lumberjack fashion forms that were popular in Minneapolis and the Pacific Northwest in the late 90s. Most of the original hipsters were the grandchildren of white Americans who fled the inner cities in the mid-1960s during desegregation and a mass exodus known as white flight. The construction of newly built all-white suburbs and Levittowns and the farmlands outside cities like Philadelphia was more than a geographic resettlement. It was essentially a mass divestment from the cities, which resulted in a near total transferring of what Josue's interviewee calls purchasing power away from the urban centers into these private redlined communities. This, in turn, created half a century of economic apartheid, in which you basically had two parallel societies, the cities and the suburbs, existing in complete isolation from each other. Throughout the 80s and 90s, cities like Philadelphia, Baltimore, and New York City spiraled into chaos and disrepair, while suburbia and its sprawl became larger and larger, even connecting metro areas like Chicago and Milwaukee. But there was one problem that the architects of white flight didn't consider, which is the mass loss of what's called cultural capital that came as a result of isolation. The first generation born into a post-white flight reality were the boomers. It should come as no surprise that they loved it and appreciated it. After all, most of their parents were hard-scrabble World War II vets who grew up in a world with no suburbs, so a white picket fence in a big backyard was like a utopia. The children of the boomers, Gen Xers, kind of liked the suburbs, but were showing some signs of angst. But the generation after them, the millennials, they envisioned a vibrant new life, a world beyond cul-de-sacs and strip malls. Put simply, they wanted to be around culture, eat interesting food, hear different languages, and just not be bored. And so a migration called reverse white flight began. It's generally acknowledged that the first hipster neighborhood in America was Williamsburg, Brooklyn, a historically Jewish, Black, and Dominican area where Vice moved their headquarters in 2001. The complete cycle of turning parts of the neighborhood, from diverse cultural corridors to flat corporate business parks, took about 15 years. And there's actually a science to how gentrification works. Tulane University professor Richard Campanella broke it down into a 4-phase model. Phase 1 is the arrival of starving artist types, legitimate, penniless, as he calls them, gutter punks, because he's from New Orleans, who are looking for a cheap place to live that's a reasonable commuting distance from upscale cultural centers. These types are often troubled. They use drugs and drink heavily, and for certain, never open any businesses, and so don't actively displace anyone. What they do, though, is signal safety that makes way for the arrival of Phase 2. Phase 2 is hipsters, but Campanella calls them the creative class. Those in the creative class fetishize the starving artist types, and are often semi-transient, meaning they kind of follow cool around the country. Unlike the broke bohemians, hipsters are typically college-educated, hyper-liberal, and usually open businesses, like coffee shops, organic food stores, juice bars, yoga studios, barbershops with exposed brick inside, vegan co-ops, and essentially introduce oat milk to the hood. Gradually, the area becomes a colony of the greater hipster network and begins seeing cross-traffic from cities like Portland, Oregon, who begin imposing their aesthetics and cultural customs onto the area. However, rent and cost of living itself does not actually rise until the third phase begins, which Campanella calls the bourgeoisie bohemian phase. This is marked by the arrival of art collectors, people who refer to themselves as socialites, Burning Man camp leaders, cultural investors, and most importantly, real estate developers with a taste for the hip, who are aware of the area's skyrocketing cultural capital and see a massive business opportunity, which often takes the form of a city-sponsored arts district. It's between phase 2 and 3 that you find the most tension, because that's when the displacement happens. In this phase, entire neighborhoods are often bulldozed to make room for luxury hotels, trendy fine dining restaurants, and hip corporate storefronts, resulting in unaffordability for both locals who are totally out of this coolness matrix, and the hipsters and bohemians that made the area cool in the first place. After the shiny new apartments are built and the landlord raises the rent, the fourth phase begins, which is the arrival of the rich, the young professional class, like tech bros and finance guys who have absolutely no interest in anything cool and view cultural capital as basically meaningless. By the time phase 4 is complete and yuppies have taken over, you're left with a sterile, metallic ghost town full of empty apartments that basically nobody wants to live in. The developers who banked on the cool factor are bummed, and the cycle of gentrification has now restarted on the outer radius of where it began, spreading like a nuclear bomb in all directions, destroying everything in its wake. In New York, you could say the bomb was dropped in Williamsburg. The blast radius is currently incinerating Bushwick, Bed-Stuy, Ridgewood, and further out into the boroughs. In Mexico City, it's safe to say the G-bomb was dropped in a neighborhood called Roma Norte, a historic district just southwest of the center of town. I'm not sure if you know this, but Mexico City is unbelievably large in size and has a higher population than New York. So there was a ton of neighborhoods for transplants to choose from. But Roma Norte's primary cultural appeal was its food. It's been a hotspot for Mexican cuisine since the 1950s.
Dude, I mean, you can get, some chilaquiles or some tacos for 4 pesos and it's like fucking good, I love it. It's great. The prices are great here.
You feel they upgrade the prices?
No, yeah, I feel like in some places the prices are going up. I mean, Roma Norte is ridiculous. Condesa is so expensive now. I looked out because I feel like Juarez, it's still a little local, but it's like the Brooklyn of New York.
In the center?
Yeah, in the center. It feels like it's like an old New York, Okay.
Beyond cultural appeal, another factor that makes cities ripe for gentrification are natural disasters. One example would be New Orleans, Louisiana. In 2005, Hurricane Katrina struck the city, killing 1,800 people and displacing half of New Orleans' population. One of the hardest hit neighborhoods was the 9th Ward. Because of the city's levees breaking, the lower 9th Ward was almost totally flattened by floodwaters. However, in the upper 9th Ward, a neighborhood now heavily rebranded as the Bywater District, homes remained intact, despite all of these homeowners having been relocated elsewhere to cities like Houston and Atlanta, where many of them lived in FEMA trailers, awaiting insurance checks and government aid. In this desperate state, and amid an uncertain future for a broken New Orleans, real estate agents swooped in and began buying entire blocks of Bywater homes in cash from their recently displaced owners, setting a foundation for a hipster enclave that would thrive about 10 years later. According to many Mexico City locals, the story of what happened in Roma Norte is actually quite similar to what happened in the Bywater. Roma was the epicenter of the 1985 Mexico City earthquake, which killed 5,000 and displaced 2 million residents, many of whom would never return.
En la Roma, pues fíjate que cuando llegué a la Roma acababa de pasar lo del temblor, entonces se vació un poco la Roma, pero ya tiene como 2-3 años que se empezó a llenar de extranjeros, mucha gentrificación, entonces ya los precios obviamente elevaron bastante.
Y cambia una avenida, ¿no? Supongo que de esta avenida para acá son unos precios más chonchos que de la avenida para allá, ¿no?
Sí, aunque también pues con eso de la gentrificación, mucha gente que vivía en la Roma se pasó a vivir a la Doctores, entonces también han hecho que los precios se eleven de renta.
Entonces sí se va desplazando y también va subiendo. Porque recuerdo la Doctores era una colonia peligrosa, ¿no? Se decía como que no todos querían vivir ahí, ¿no? Es un barrio a raíz de que están desplazando. Ahora también la Doctores es como una nueva Roma, ¿no?
Exacto, sí, si te das cuenta, pues siguen estando las vecindades, pero ya ves un tipo de gente diferente que vive en la Doctores ya ahorita, desde hace un tiempo ya tiene eso.
When I first moved here, it was a completely different area, There's been gentrification since after the earthquake of '85, right? And it's been 20 or 30 years, but it really got scaled up in the last 3-4 years with the pandemic and everything, but the prices have gone up a lot. Then you have the inflation kick in too a little bit later here, and so the last couple of years have been really tough for locals, tough for foreigners too, because I mean there's a lot of I don't know, exploitation of the market, I think, from local Mexicans who own the apartments, no regulations from the government, and there's just been kind of this free-for-all, but I think things are kind of settling down a little bit. But yeah, I mean, I've been here for 10 years. I'm a permanent resident, pay my taxes.
You are
yeah.
a permanent, Mexican, brother?
Yeah.
I don't have any plans to go back. Like I said, a permanent resident. I pay my taxes here. I bought my apartment 10 years ago here, and it's probably where I'll die.
You pay taxes, I don't pay taxes, bro. Crazy, bro.
No one likes to, but...
Okay. Perfecto.
That's it?
That's it.
Hey guys, this is not an advertisement. If you speak Spanish or you want to learn Spanish, I have a great suggestion for you. Go to our Spanish language channel, Canal Cinco. We've gone through the process of overdubbing all of our classic videos in Spanish using real human voice actors. So if you want to go check out classics like O-Block,
Oh, J-Money, bro, le tenía miedo a ese loco, bro.
Hoff Twins,
Dos chicas negras en el Benz.
San Francisco Streets,
Trabajo todos los días y camino entre mierda.
and beyond,
Un coaster es un buster con una C de mi maldito barrio.
go to Canal Cinco. I'm going to put the link in the description and the pinned comment. We're going to be posting there every single week with new overdubs of all the classics, as well as new content filmed all across Latin America. So if you want to support, head on over. Adios.
The reason that I felt that it was important to illustrate these phases of gentrification in such detail is because it appears that Mexico City is somewhere between phase 2 and 3. While certainly more expensive than it was, Roma Norte hasn't been bulldozed completely to make way for glass condominiums, and certainly retains the vibrance and energy that made it attractive to Americans in the first place. Which leads me to a unifying conclusion that's more important than differences between language and nationality. No one, from the locals to the digital nomads, want Mexico City to change. The Americans, Russians, and French transplants Josue interviewed possess a genuine love for the place, and they aren't the ones raising the rent. It's the landlords, developers, real estate tycoons, and city government that make these calls, seeing an opportunity to capitalize on hyperinflated foreign currencies. If properly regulated, taxed, and accommodated, the influx of digital nomads could be a great thing for the city. This isn't something that neighborhood natives are totally blind to.
Sí nos afecta fuerte económicamente mucho, pero creo que en general a la ciudad le beneficia. Le beneficia porque se ve obligada a mejorar su respuesta.
Y la verdad yo creo que eso es bueno.
No se ve ni basura, hay más policías caminando, güey. En Iztapalapa cuando ves un puto puerco caminando entre calles, güey.
Nunca. Y basura en todos lados.
Güey, aquí no mames, ni un puto perro ves. Pues no está chido, güey.
No sé, yo creo que estoy en un punto medio porque pues es algo que no puedes detener. Simplemente pues es la evolución de la vida y de las personas.
Pues es un país, o sea, que acepta a todo mundo, entonces no los puedes detener.
O sea, es bueno porque pues da de qué hablar, de que pues en realidad están como que sucediendo cosas buenas en la ciudad y pues como país tercermundista yo creo estamos avanzando, ya que yo creo más, estamos progresando.
Mexico City's Central Boulevard is undergoing a full-fledged renaissance as wealthy Mexican and international firms stake ever bigger claims on the landmark promenade.
La primera palabra que aprendí en español fue la cuenta, por favor.
La cuenta for the restaurants.
Una caña, una cerveza.
Okay.
It's creating tourism and money for small businesses.
Pero eso no deja de que pues, haya otras cosas, ¿no? Malas. Y pues de hecho mis dos amigos son extranjeros. O sea, la verdad es de que ya cambié mi círculo social, lo dejé atrás donde los amigos con los que allá. ¿Por qué? Pues no había progreso, no veía progreso, aparte de que no les gustaba lo que a mí me gustaba. Y aparte lo más importante es de que pues todos estamos confabulados en esto, ¿no?
I came here because of the war in Russia.
Russians are fleeing the country. Flights from Moscow to all visa-free destinations selling out quickly.
Okay. Yeah, I'm afraid of my life.
Okay.
Yeah.
You working in DJ?
Yeah, I'm DJing. Me and my friend Lane, we are making our project. It calls Zond.
No hurry, no rush, no hurry.
And also I'm working as a waiter in a restaurant.
Ok.
Yeah.
Lane, mucho gusto. ¿De dónde eres?
Soy de Estados Unidos, de Los Ángeles.
¿Y qué te gusta más, México o Estados Unidos?
Los dos tienen sus cosas chidas, pero ahorita un poco más México sí me gusta.
¿Cuál es la razón por la que ahorita te gusta más México?
La razón porque conocí a buenos amigos así y siempre me gustaba como el tema de DJ.
No hurry, no rush.
Yo creo que pues al final de cuentas lo positivo pues es que puedes conocer a más gente. La mayoría que vivimos en Ciudad de México, como siempre ha sido una ciudad cosmopolita, donde siempre ha habido gente de diferentes países, ¿no? Y todos tenemos compas que son de otros países y la neta es que hay gente que pues es bien chida, ¿no? Y aprendes de su cultura.
When you really get to Mexico City, when you stay in these places, when you meet random cool artists on the street, you realize, bro, it's a beautiful place.
A beautiful place that will likely continue to grow at an exponential rate in the coming years, as inflation in the US, as well as the rising cost of living, make things like home ownership nearly unattainable for the millions of young professionals entering the white-collar workforce. A recent study conducted by MBO Business Partners suggested that 70 million Americans are currently expressing interest in adapting the digital nomad lifestyle. And of those 70 million, 9% are already putting their plans into motion. So what's been seen in Mexico City since COVID is just the beginning. In preparation for this mass migration, a number of countries, like Japan, have already introduced digital nomad visas, which require remote workers to file taxes in Japan, regardless of where their paycheck is coming from. Something similar was advocated for by Mexico City Councilwoman Frida Guillen, who proposed something called a digital nomad tax that would charge them all a flat fee of roughly 3,000 pesos or $155 per month. But this idea was shot down by her constituents and never really came to fruition, because after all, this was an inside job in the first place.
Airbnb recently struck a deal with local authorities to make this place one of 20 global destinations for so-called digital nomads.
The mass buyouts of apartments in these neighborhoods to convert them into Airbnbs and market them to wealthy foreigners was directly facilitated by the city government, who pulled no punches in evicting tenants without warning.
This woman has asked us not to reveal her identity. After her apartment building signed a deal with the home share company Airbnb, she was given 5 days to move out. She says short notice evictions are becoming commonplace across the city.
Que al final mucho de eso es un problema conjunto, ¿no? Porque también quienes están subiendo este precio son los propietarios que están aprovechando que están viniendo extranjeros aquí a rentar, ¿no?
Sí, porque los extranjeros no la están pidiendo. Es de los propios mexicanos.
¿Lo suben ellos o lo suben los propietarios de estos departamentos, de estas casas, ¿no? Entonces es un fenómeno conjunto de que llegan muchos extranjeros y claro, los dueños de departamentos dicen, no mames, le podemos sacar más dinero. Y entonces es como va pasando por las dos partes, ¿no?
Without proper restrictions in place, the only group of people that could collectively stop gentrification right now are landlords. Local landlords, which makes things even more complicated.
Es un poco difícil, yo creo, porque pues los dueños tienen al final la decisión, ¿no? Pero como tal sí se deberían de poner un poco más, pues apoyar a la misma gente, ¿no?
I'm gonna go out on a limb here and suggest that if there's one thing that landlords don't do, it would be supporting the people by way of voluntarily reducing rent costs. So many locals feel that the only possible solution moving forward is to impose government-mandated regulations on both what landlords can charge and immigration itself.
Bueno, por un lado considero que sí es importante que los países abran sus fronteras para recibir a personas que vienen de otros lugares. Sin embargo, sí me parece que deben de haber límites, porque si se permite la entrada masiva de extranjeros, empiezan a comprar las propiedades, a poner los negocios y eso desplaza el mercado nacional. Entonces me parece que lo que tendría que haber es un equilibrio. No estoy de acuerdo que no se permita la entrada de extranjeros establecerse en México, pero tampoco que sea en demasía.
¿Usted ha sufrido algunos de los efectos negativos de la gentrificación?
Sí, precisamente pues el uso excesivo de los recursos, como por ejemplo el agua.
Mexico City, one of the world's most populated cities at nearly 22 million people, could run out of water in just months. It's being referred to as day zero, and experts warn it could happen in June. Tourism plays into this water shortage.
A tourist uses between 3 to 4 times more water than a resident.
Y la falta de ciertos lineamientos que no aplican por igual a todos, ¿verdad?
Shortly after these interviews were conducted, like actually 24 hours later, Mexico City government unanimously approved the largest rent freeze in their country's history since 1946, prohibiting Airbnb landlords in Roma Norte from raising the prices any higher, and ensuring Mexican tenants who make less than digital nomads make a reduced rate rent, as well as government housing loans in an effort to combat displacement. The rent freeze will also require all landlords to register their rental contracts with the city, and establishes strict fines and penalties for any of them caught overcharging foreign tenants, or evicting Mexican renters without proper notice, which overall is great news. Back to Josue.
Hola, hoy en Hola, ¿hablas español? Hola, ¿hablan español?
Sí.
¿Sí?
Sí.
Where are you from?
Ay, de aquí.
Ok, bueno, muchas gracias.
Sale, bye.
Pues bueno, se resuelve un misterio más.
As Josue wrapped up his report, we decided to send another bilingual friend of ours to a very different part of the country, yet a place where the influence of Americans, and particularly American dollars, has been felt just as hard.
Esta es una entrevista exclusiva Canal Cinco.
En Tijuana.
Reportando en vivo aquí de Tijuana, México.
Un saludo para Canal Cinco.
Échale ganas, no te agüites, respeta a tu madre. ¿Qué línea de trabajo haces?
Sexo servidora.
Soy sexo servidora.
It's the greatest border in the world.
Tijuana. TJ, a historic border town with the highest number of homicides in Mexico, but otherwise a great city.
Estas situaciones nos hacen más fuertes, sí, nos hacen más fuertes poder sobresalir.
However, Tijuana, like Mexico City, has an Americans problem, specifically a horny Americans problem. Every night, thousands of Americans cross the US-Mexico border, typically on foot, coming from cities like San Diego, Santa Barbara, and Yuma, Arizona, to engage in commercial sex acts with oftentimes trafficked women at a full-service flat fee of $100 US.
Hola, buenos dias, guys. John here.
In this video, we're going to speak to sex workers in TJ, recently divorced dads looking for love, carefree locals dressed as Nazis for Halloween, and most importantly, American dudes paying for sex.
Viva Mexico! Viva Mexico! I love Mexico! Everybody come to fucking Mexico. This is the place to be.
The bitches here are wild. Anything you want to do has a price, bro. Anything.
Dude, it's fucking lit. It's so free. Picked up some stuff off a random street dealer and probably got skimped, but it was lit.
I've already done some, blow off some titties and shit, but like, I'm not trying to get too fucked up or else I'm gonna start eating strippers' ass up out of Hong Kong, bro.
Oh my God, you can't get better than this, doggy.
OC, baby.
For obvious reasons, it'll be difficult for this video to ever be posted on YouTube due to the content it contains. So if you'd like to see this episode, go to our Patreon, www.patreon.com/channel5. As many of you know, we are a completely independent, 95% crowdfunded operation, and it's your $5 monthly subscriptions that keep the train rolling and keep us on the road. We've also introduced a Patreon exclusive show called Channel 5 Newsroom that gives our subscribers a behind-the-scenes look at our life in the office, in the field, and out on the town. So if you like this episode and want to see more, please consider supporting us. Have a good day.
Channel 5 live worldwide, Hollywood and Vine.
Fuck the authority, Channel 5 News.
Channel 55. We don't fuck with custers, and 5 is the best number.
Next question.